The signal came first. Not a weapon, not a warning shot, just words clean, translated automatically into Drathian standard language by the relay station's communication system, delivered in a voice so calm it sounded almost bored. This is UN Border Control, Sol System Perimeter Station 7. You are entering restricted human space. This is your first formal notice. Please halt your advance and identify your command vessel. You have 30 minutes to respond before this incident is logged as a hostile incursion. Admiral Vorn read the translation twice. Then he leaned back in his command chair and laughed. Not a small laugh, a full, open laugh that filled the bridge of the Drathian flagship Urath's fist. His officers joined in. His tactical chief, a veteran named Preth, laughed so hard he had to brace himself against his console. 47 warships, the third expansion fleet of the Drathian Collective, the most decorated, most feared combat force in the Eastern Galactic Arm, and a station with 3 humans on it was asking them to halt. Preth pulled up the data on the station. It was small, barely armed. Sensor arrays, a communication rig, 2-point defense units that couldn't scratch the paint on a scout frigate, 3 life signs inside. "Should I respond?" his comms officer asked. "No," Vorn said, still smiling. "Log their little message and move on." The fleet moved on. The second warning came 18 minutes later from the same calm voice. Same professional tone. No panic. No anger. Just the facts laid out plainly, the fleet's current coordinates, the specific treaties being violated by article and number, and a new detail. Earth Defense Command had been notified. A withdrawal window of 40 minutes was now open. Vorn didn't laugh this time. He just waved his hand. "Ignore it." Inside the station, Operator Dara closed the outgoing channel. She was 31 years old, 6 months into her posting, and she had trained for exactly this situation in a simulator that she had always assumed was being overly dramatic. Now she understood the simulator had been understating things. She opened her direct line to Earth Defense Command and reported the refusal in 4 sentences. No drama, just the numbers, fleet size, entry coordinates, timestamp of refusal, estimated time to inner boundary. The duty officer on the other end acknowledged the report, confirmed the incident log was open, and asked if she needed anything. "No," Dara said, "just logging the clock." She meant it literally. Every refusal had to be timestamped. That was protocol. Not for the battle, humanity's defense systems didn't need paperwork to function. The timestamps were for afterward, for the record, for the moment when someone in a council room somewhere asked how many chances the Drathian had been given. The answer would be precise. The fleet crossed the outer marker at full cruise speed. Vorn stood at the forward display and looked at the star map ahead. Sol system laid out clean and clear, the sun a bright point at the center, the planets in their slow orbits, Earth just a small blue mark near the inner ring. He had read the intelligence files on humanity. A single planet species, relatively young in galactic terms, with a history of internal warfare that had left their civilization fractured and aggressive. They had a defense treaty network and a seat on the Galactic Council, but they were not a major power, not by any metric the Drathian used. The border warning was probably automated, he had decided. The calm voice, the precise treaty citations, that was the output of a system running on its own, probably barely monitored by those 3 life signs on the station. He checked the inner boundary distance, 4 hours at current speed. His third warning arrived at the 2-hour mark. Same voice, same tone, same offer. A withdrawal corridor was still open. The fleet had until the boundary marker to turn back with no further action taken. The exact coordinates of the corridor were transmitted alongside the message, perfectly formatted and easy to follow. Preth looked at Vorn. Vorn looked at the display. "Are they actually expecting us to leave?" Preth asked. "They are hopping," Vorn said. There is a difference. He did not order a course change. What he did not know, what none of them knew, was that three things happened the moment the fleet refused that third warning. The first, Dara logged the refusal, tagged it with a timestamp, and added a single line to the incident report: third refusal confirmed. Inner boundary crossing projected at 3:14 station time. Recommend system standby. The second, Earth Defense Command's duty officer Harlan reviewed the log, cross-checked the fleet's trajectory, confirmed hostile intent classification, and countersigned a response authorization. He did it in under 4 minutes. He then went back to his coffee. The third, somewhere in the deep dark of the outer Sol system, in places that didn't appear on any chart, in structures that looked like debris or ice or nothing at all, systems that had been in standby mode for 11 months quietly began to wake up. They did not announce themselves. They did not move. They simply became ready. On the station, Dara prepared the fourth warning. She had 12 more queued after it. Protocol required all 14 to be sent before the automated systems were considered fully cleared to operate without restriction. She was going to send every single one. The fleet sailed on, bright and proud and full of certainty, into the dark between the markers, and the dark did not look back. It didn't need to. It was already watching. The Galactic Oversight Council's emergency feed did not ring an alarm when the Drathine fleet crossed into Sol system space. It simply updated a status marker from yellow to red, the way a hospital monitor changes color when a patient's numbers go wrong: quiet, factual, and deeply serious to anyone who understood what they were reading. Ambassador Hale of the Suri Compact understood. She was in her private office when the notification arrived, and she sat very still for almost a full minute before she did anything at all. On the wall behind her desk was a small framed document, a copy of the Verath Accord, signed 12 years ago after what her government officially called the Verath Navigation Incident. What it actually was, only a handful of people in the compact still remembered clearly. Hale was one of them. She had been a junior diplomatic aide then. She had read the battle damage reports. She had sat in the room where the admirals went very quiet and very pale. She had watched a civilization that had never lost a war suddenly understand what losing looked like, not because they had been beaten in battle, but because 22 of their ships had simply ceased to exist between one sensor sweep and the next, with no attacker identified and no debris found that could explain the scale of it. She pulled up the Drathine fleet data on her terminal: 47 vessels. She closed her eyes briefly. Then she opened a channel to Ambassador Das of the Mechari Trade Union. Das was already awake, already on the feed. His face on the screen was tight in the way people look when they know something terrible is coming and cannot stop it. "You saw," Hale said. "Trying to reach their diplomatic office for the last hour," Das said. "No response. Their government is either asleep or they know and they don't care." He rubbed the side of his face. "How many warnings has Earth sent?" 7, as of the last log update. Das let out a long breath. "They won't stop." "No," Hale agreed, "they won't." The Mechari had learned about humanity the hard way, not through combat, but through a border dispute 40 years ago when a survey fleet had crossed into Sol space without clearance. The ships were not attacked. They were simply contained, held in a zone the Mechari could not locate, by a system that left no sensor signature their instruments could identify. When the ships were returned, every crew member was unharmed. No weapons had been fired. The Mechari had signed a border treaty within 6 months. "I'll try their council seat," Das said, meaning the Drathine observer on the council. "But if the fleet hasn't stopped for Earth's warnings, I don't know why they'd stop for mine." He dropped the channel. Hale sat alone again. On the other side of the council floor, in a small observation office that smelled like old paper and cold metal, Ambassador Rith of the Orathi hegemony was doing something different. He was not making calls. He was reading files. Rith was old enough that he had direct memory of the period galactic historians called the Quiet Decades, when humanity had first expanded into space, and the major powers had assumed, incorrectly, that a single-planet species with no colonies and no galactic allies would be easy to manage. He was pulling up files that were not classified exactly, but were rarely read because they were deeply uncomfortable. Battle loss records from 4 separate incidents over 60 years. Each one followed the same pattern: a power that had underestimated Earth's border protocols, an incursion that had seemed easy, and then losses that could not be explained cleanly by any standard model of space combat. The files all had a common note in the margin, added by an Orathi military analyst decades ago, that had never been officially endorsed, but had never been removed either. It read, "Humanity does not defend its border with a fleet. It defends it with a system. The fleet is theater. The system is the weapon." Rith read that note again. Then he pulled up the current feed. 47 Drathine ships in Sol system space. Earth had sent, he checked, 9 warnings now. He thought about the first time he had read these files, years ago, and how he had not quite believed them. Not because the data was unconvincing, but because the implications were difficult. If the reports were accurate, humanity had built something that no galactic power had ever managed to build. A defense that was essentially invisible, that required no pilots in danger, that activated only when every other option had been exhausted, and that left almost no trace of what it had done or how. What kind of civilization builds something like that? The kind that had spent thousands of years trying to destroy itself and had gotten very good at it before it ever looked at the stars. He closed the files. He did not make any calls. There was nothing to say that the Drathine would hear in time, and he had learned from long experience that there were moments when the only honest thing a person could do was witness. The feed updated again. 12 warnings sent, 2 hours to the inner boundary. Rith sat back and waited. The first one vanished at 3:17 station time. It was a scout frigate, light, fast, positioned at the very edge of the fleet's formation, 2 kilometers ahead of the main group. One moment it was there, a solid green marker on the Drathine tactical display. The next moment it was not. No explosion, no distress signal, no debris cloud appearing on the long-range sensors. The marker simply disappeared from the screen as though someone had reached over and pressed a delete key. The tactical officer, Preth, stared at the display for 3 full seconds before he said anything. "Grath's spear is not responding." Vorn looked up from the navigation report he had been reading. "Communication fault." Running diagnostics. Preth's hands moved across his console. No signal at all, not even a carrier wave. That was unusual. A communication fault still left a carrier wave. A powered-down ship still left a thermal signature. A destroyed ship left debris. Preth pulled up the last sensor data from the frigate's position and found nothing. Not the nothing of empty space, but the nothing of a sensor reading that simply ended midstream, the way a recording stops when the device is switched off. Vorn stood up. "Send a probe to their last position." The probe was launched. It reached the coordinates in 6 minutes. Its telemetry returned clean data, empty space. No wreckage, no radiation, no trace of a vessel that had been there 8 minutes ago. Nobody spoke on the bridge. Then the second frigate went. This one was on the opposite side of the formation, starboard edge, 30 kilometers from the first disappearance. Same result. The marker blinked out between one sensor sweep and the next. No warning, no damage indicators, just gone. "All ships all stop," Vorn said quietly. The fleet halted. 45 ships now, sitting in formation in the dark, engines throttled to minimal. Vorn walked to the forward display and studied the tactical map. The 2 missing frigates had been at the edges of the formation, the furthest points from the flagship. He looked at that detail for a long moment. Something was picking at the edges. He opened the fleet-wide channel. All captains report status. The reports came back quickly, 43 captains confirming normal operations. 2 empty channels where Grath's Spear and the second frigate used to be. Vorn listened to those empty channels for a moment. In 30 years of military service, he had never heard a sound quite like it. Not silence exactly, but the specific absence of a voice that should have been there. "What is attacking us?" he asked Preth. Preth could not answer. His sensor board showed nothing, no ships, no projectiles, no energy discharges. Whatever was operating out there was not registering on any of the instruments the fleet carried. He had tried every scan frequency, every detection mode, every passive listening array. The space around them looked completely empty. Could it be a gravitational weapon? The engineering chief offered. Some kind of spatial distortion. "There would be a detectable field," Preth said. "There's nothing." "Explosive decompression, some kind of." "The ships are gone, not destroyed. Gone, decompression leaves debris." Nobody had an answer. That was, in some ways, the most frightening thing, not the losses themselves, but the fact that 47 warships carrying the best sensor technology in the Drathine fleet had collectively no idea what was happening to them. The third disappearance came 22 minutes after the fleet stopped moving. It was not a frigate this time. It was a mid-class destroyer, positioned in the second ring of the formation, not at the edge, but not at the center either. The marker vanished in the space between one standard sensor sweep and the next, 27 seconds from present to absent. Vorn felt something he had not felt in a very long time, genuine, cold fear. It was not the fear of being outgunned. He understood being outgunned, you could calculate that, adapt to it, retreat from it. This was something else. This was the fear of a problem that had no shape, an enemy with no face, a weapon with no signature. The Drathine had fought 40 wars and Vorn had personally commanded 11 of them, and in every single one there had been a moment where you could look at the tactical display and understand, even in defeat, what was killing you. He could not do that now. He opened the emergency broadcast channel, the one reserved for fleet-level crisis communication, and kept his voice as steady as he could manage. "All ships, new formation, collapse to close order around the flagship, maximum sensor overlap, no vessel moves independently, we hold position until we have answers." The fleet began moving into the tighter formation. Vorn watched the markers converge on his display. He did not know, could not know, that the systems watching the fleet had not paused because the fleet had stopped moving. They had simply recalculated. The pause was not mercy. It was geometry. The formations had changed. The variables needed a moment to update. The dark around the fleet was patient in a way no living crew could be. It had no stress, no anxiety, no uncertainty. It was simply a system doing what it had been built to do, waiting with perfect mechanical calm for the next calculation to complete. Far away on the relay station, Dara noted the fleet's halt in her log and added a single observation. "Fleet has stopped advancing. Losses acknowledged. Awaiting next action." Then she cued the 13th warning and sent it. The debrief room on Platform 9 was not impressive. It was a small metal box bolted to the underside of a supply hub on the far side of Jupiter. No windows, no decorations, just a table, 2 chairs, a wall screen, and a coffee maker that had not worked in 6 months. Commander Saya used it because it was quiet and nobody wandered in by accident. Her junior officer, Aldrich, had been on duty for 19 hours. He was holding a tablet but not reading it. He was watching the tactical feed on the wall screen, where small red markers in the Sol outer system were slowly going dark. "Permission to ask something," he said. "Go ahead." "What exactly is out there?" He meant the system, the thing that was removing Drathine ships from the universe without leaving any evidence. In his 8 months with Earth Defense Command, he had seen references to it in protocol documents, in the form of activation conditions and standby schedules, but never a plain description of what it actually was. Saya sat down across from him and considered how to answer. "You know how galactic powers do defense," she said. "Fleets, garrison stations, patrol routes. Right, you park ships at your border, visible ships, big ones ideally. The visibility is part of the message. It says, this is what you'll fight if you cross." She picked up a pen and turned it over in her fingers. "We tried that. For about 30 years after first contact, Earth ran a conventional border patrol. Ships on rotation, stations at key points, the whole standard model. What happened? Nothing dramatic, but our analysts noticed something. The visible ships were the problem. If you can see what's defending a border, you can calculate whether you can beat it. You can decide the math is in your favor. The visibility invites the calculation." She set the pen down. "So we asked a different question. What if the border couldn't be calculated? What if you didn't know what you were walking into?" Aldrich looked at the screen. Another Drathine marker had gone dark in the last 30 seconds. "The system isn't one thing," Saya continued. "It's layered. Parts of it are kinetic, but in ways that leave no signature on standard sensors. Parts of it are field-based. Parts of it work on principles that our own engineers describe with math rather than words. The individual components were developed over 80 years by about a dozen separate programs that didn't all know about each other." She paused. "Which, honestly, is why no other civilization has been able to reverse engineer it from the incidents. There is no single thing to find." "How do you activate it?" "We don't. Not manually, not in real time. The authorization Harlan signed this morning was a pre-clearance. It told the system that this particular incursion met the criteria for full defensive response. After that, the system manages itself. It doesn't need us to pull a trigger. It just needs us to confirm that the warnings were given and refused." Aldrich was quiet for a moment. "And the warnings, the 14 warnings, that's not just protocol. It's documentation," Saya said. "Every refusal gets logged, timestamped, and stored. Not because the system needs permission to work, but because afterward, in whatever council room or diplomatic session follows, we need the record to be clear. The Drathine had 14 separate opportunities to stop. 14. Logged, time-stamped, witnessed by their own communication systems." She looked at the screen. "Nobody gets to say they weren't told." Aldrich stared at the feed for a long moment. The Drathine fleet had contracted into a tight cluster, close formation, probably hoping that density would make the losses stop. It wouldn't change the outcome. The system didn't care about formation geometry. "Does it feel like anything?" he asked, "watching this?" Saya thought about that. She was not someone who avoided hard questions, and she did not avoid this one. "It feels like watching a consequence," she said. "There's no one out there, no human pilot at risk, no crew making decisions under fire, just a system doing what it was designed to do to people who chose 14 times to keep going." She looked at the screen. "I think about the crews on those ships. I think they probably had families. I think most of them probably didn't choose this mission, they were assigned to it." She was quiet for a moment. "That's the part that sits with you." "Then why build it this way?" "Because the alternative is sending humans to fight them," Saya said simply. "And humans die in fights. This way, only the people who came here die. Our people go home." She stood up. "That's the trade. It's not a comfortable trade, but it's the one we made." She moved to the door, then stopped. "One more thing. When this is over, the system goes back to standby, same as always. The border goes back to being quiet and dark and apparently empty." She looked at him. "That's also part of the design, the not knowing, the maybe nothing happens if we cross. The uncertainty is the deterrent, not the fleet, not the size of it." She opened the door. "The fleet is theater, Aldrich. The system is the border." She left. He stayed, watching the screen. 3 more markers went dark while he sat there. He counted them and did not look away. 31 ships were gone. Vorn knew this the way a person knows a wound, not abstractly, but as a physical fact that kept asserting itself against his ability to think clearly. 31 out of 47. 2/3 of the Third Expansion Fleet. He had served in the Drathine military for 30 years, and he had never lost more than 3 ships in any single engagement. He had never even heard of losses like this in a battle that showed no attacker, no weapon, and no explanation. The 16 remaining ships were in a tight cluster. Engines off. Active sensors off. Preth had theorized, with no evidence either way, that active sensor pings might somehow be triggering the losses, so Vorn had ordered everything passive. Every remaining captain was running silent and waiting. They had been waiting for 2 hours. Nothing had happened in those 2 hours. No new disappearances. No communications from the human side. Just silence and the terrible specific knowledge of 31 empty channels on the fleet-wide band. Vorn's communications officer, a young ensign named Bet, had been trying every frequency for the last 90 minutes. Military bands, civilian emergency bands, diplomatic relay frequencies. No response from any human source. Then at the 2-hour mark, a response came. Not from Earth Defense Command, not from some distant military installation. From the relay station, the small, barely armed relay station at the perimeter, manned by 3 people that had been sending warnings since before the fleet crossed the outer marker. The same calm voice. Drathine flagship, this is UN Border Control Station 7. We are reading your fleet at current coordinates. You are being contacted under the post-incursion communication protocol. Please confirm you are receiving this transmission. Vorn opened the channel himself. His voice came out steadier than he expected. This is Admiral Vorn of the Drathine Collective Fleet. We are receiving you. Acknowledged, Admiral. I'm Operator Dara, Station 7. I'm authorized to relay the following under diplomatic protocol. A brief pause, as though she was reading from something. The remaining vessels of your fleet are being permitted to withdraw. This is standard policy. Vessels that cease forward advancement are removed from active targeting. A withdrawal corridor has been calculated from your current position to the outer boundary marker. I am transmitting the coordinates now. Vorn watched the coordinates appear on his navigation console. A clear path, straight back the way they had come, no deviation. He stared at them for a moment. The corridor will remain open for 2 hours from this transmission, Dara continued. After that, the automated systems will resume unrestricted operation. If your fleet is outside the inner boundary before the window closes, no further action will be taken. There was a silence on the channel. Vorn realized she had finished and was waiting. Why, he said. Admiral, why are we being allowed to leave? He had not planned to ask that. The question came out on its own, stripped of rank and strategy. 31 of my ships are gone. You could take the rest. Why offer a corridor? The pause on the other end was short. Because you stopped, Dara said. That was the complete answer. She did not add to it. Vorn sat with it for a moment. You stopped. Not because he had retreated, he had stopped because he was terrified and had no information and no options. But in the logic of this border and whatever governed it, the act of stopping was the thing that mattered. Not intention, not the reason, just the action. He thought of the 14 warnings. He thought of the withdrawal corridors offered at every step, even when his fleet was at full advance. He thought of 31 ships that were simply gone, and the 16 that were not, and why the 16 were not. The corridor, he said to Preth, take it. He did not make a speech. He did not explain himself to the fleet. He opened the fleet-wide channel and gave coordinates and a heading and said, all ships follow my lead. Low speed, no deviation. The 16 ships began to move. It was a slow transit, nearly 90 minutes to reach the inner boundary, then another 40 to clear the outer marker. Nobody spoke much during the journey. A few of the captains checked in at intervals, confirming course and reporting normal operations, but there was no conversation beyond the functional. At some point during the transit, Bet, the young communications ensign, quietly began drafting the incident report on her secondary console, not because anyone asked her to, not because protocol required it right now. She just needed something to do with her hands. She typed 314 inner boundary crossed, 317 first contact loss recorded, duration of incursion 6 hours 40 minutes, vessels lost 31, vessels withdrawn 16. She stopped, looked at the numbers, started again. All crew of withdrawn vessels, present and unharmed. She didn't know why she added that. It felt important to note. When the last ship crossed the outer boundary marker, Dara logged the corridor closure and updated the incident record. Active targeting had already reverted to standby 6 minutes earlier, once the last vessel cleared the inner ring. The automated systems settled back into their quiet watch, passive, patient, dark. On the flagship, Vorn did not celebrate. He sat in his command chair and looked at the star map Sol system behind him now, shrinking with distance, unremarkable to look at. Just a yellow star with a handful of planets. He looked at the 31 empty channels on the fleet band and left them open. He did not close them for the rest of the journey home. The formal report entered the Galactic Council record at 900 the following morning, submitted by Ambassador Hale under her standing mandate to document all Sol system border incidents witnessed by member states. It was 11 pages long and written in the flat, precise language that Council reports required. It listed the fleet's entry time, the number of warnings issued, the timestamps of each refusal, the sequence of losses, the withdrawal, and the outcome. It included no commentary, no interpretation, and no recommendations. It did not need to. The numbers were the commentary. 47 vessels entered. 16 returned. 0 human casualties. Duration, 6 hours and 40 minutes. Hale sat in the council gallery as the newer member representatives read it. She watched their faces in the way she had learned to watch faces during her years in diplomacy, not for obvious reactions, but for the small things. The slight pause before someone turned a page. The moment when a reader's eyes went back to a line and read it again. The loss ratio was the thing that stopped them, not the technology, not the doctrine, not the word automated. The loss ratio, 31 out of 47, with 0 human engagement. They were trying to map that number onto something they understood, and they couldn't find a category for it. A young representative from the Hevari coalition leaned over to her colleague and whispered something. Hale was too far away to hear it, but she had seen that exact look before, the look of someone who had just recalculated their assumptions about a neighbor they thought they understood. Good, she thought, that was the point. In a closed session across the city, the Drathian High Command was having a very different experience of the same information. The military faction that had authorized the border crossing was not present at this session. Officially, they were on leave pending review. Unofficially, everyone in the room understood that their careers had ended the moment the fleet's loss report arrived. The session had been open for 3 hours, and most of those hours had been spent not discussing strategy, but sitting with the tactical recording from the flagship, playing it forward and forward again, watching 31 green markers disappear from the screen with no corresponding source identified. A senior analyst named Gore finally said the thing nobody wanted to say. There is no countermeasure available to us for an attack we cannot detect. You cannot jam a weapon you cannot find. You cannot intercept a system with no emission signature. You cannot plan around something with no pattern our instruments can read. He set down his notes. We sent 47 ships into that system. We know the outcome. The tactical data offers no path to a different outcome with any fleet we could reasonably assemble. The math does not change with more ships. The room was quiet. The motion before us, said the session chair, is reclassification of the Sol system to prohibited zone status under galactic transit law, permanent, no expiration review. The vote was silent and unanimous. In 14 years of council observation, Hale had never seen a prohibited zone motion pass without at least one dissenting vote. When the drafting result came through on the council feed, she read the notation, unanimous, and allowed herself a small, tired exhale. Back on Relay Station 7, Dara's shift ended at noon. She filed her final incident report, cross-checked the automated logs against her manual records, confirmed the timestamps matched, and submitted the package to Earth Defense Command's archive system. The whole filing process took about 20 minutes. Then she made herself a meal in the station's small kitchen and sat at the table by the communication console. Harlan checked in from command at 12:30, a routine end-of-incident call, 2 minutes of professional exchange. He confirmed the system had fully reverted to standby. She confirmed the corridor had been cleared and the logs were filed. He asked if the station needed any resupply on the next rotation. She said she'd put in a request for a new coffee maker. He laughed, she smiled. The call ended. She sat alone in the quiet of the station for a while after that. Outside the small porthole window above the console, space looked exactly as it always did, vast and dark and silent, with no sign of anything that had passed through it. No debris, no scarring, no evidence. Just stars. She thought briefly about the Drathine crews. The ones who came back. The ones who didn't. She had read enough incident history to know that the survivors often carried the silence of this place with them for a long time, that the specific not knowing, the inability to explain what had killed their ships, was in some ways harder than a clean defeat. She did not feel guilty. She had sent 14 warnings. She had offered corridors. She had done every part of her job exactly as trained. But she thought about it anyway, the way people do when the weight of a thing settles after the work is done. Then she cleared her tray, checked the automated warning broadcast, still cycling, still patient, still reaching out into the dark with its polite and precise instructions, and went asleep. The stars stayed where they always were. The border stayed where it had always been. And somewhere in the outer dark, the system returned to standby, quiet, invisible, waiting for the next time someone would look at the warning and decide it didn't apply to